Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer, South Carolina, making some significant changes on the offensive side of the football. And I'll say this, I don't think this will be the last of the changes that you see to South Carolina's coaching staff, specifically on offense. Now, we start with this Lonnie Teasley out at South Carolina Sunday afternoon. I think this is a change that makes a lot of sense to the South Carolina fans that are listening. And look, we never get up here and celebrate firings. These coaches get paid a lot of money to do a job at a high level, and it's really hard to argue that Lonnie Teasley was doing his job well. This has been one of the most inconsistent offensive lines that we've seen, not only in this conference, but really in this country over the last couple of years. And this year, I mean, it just got off the rails in a monster way. And the most frustrating part about this offensive line's performance, and I'll put my hand up and say I was dead wrong about this. I looked at this roster back in August and said, this is the most talented South Carolina offensive line we've seen in a minute. It's the deepest unit that we've seen in a very long time. I was sky high optimistic that this offensive line could do some damage in 2025. I thought it might be a good unit in 2025, and it turns out it's been the worst unit in the SEC thus far. Can't run the football, can't hold up in pass protection. The most frustrating part about it is that you can kind of tell this unit is lost, right? They're just kind of throwing different offensive line rotations out there every single week and hoping one sticks. But then when you watch these games back, the communication between these five guys up front, completely out of whack. We're not picking up blitzes the right way. We're allowing a lot of run through on the run scheme. It's been a unit that don't think it takes a rocket scientist to understand that this unit's been really, really bad in 2025, and I think that falls on the feet of Lonnie Teasley. Now, this is more what I want to get into. I don't think there's a massive surprise that Shane Beamer's making this change. I think maybe we're surprised that he's making the change in the middle of the season. You know, historically, that's not what Shane Beamer does, but I don't think it's a surprise that we're making a change. What are the other changes that we could see at South Carolina is one conversation I want to have. And number two, who would be some offensive line coaches that we think would make a lot of sense for South Carolina? That's what I want to get into as well. Before we do, and as always, to the South Carolina fans, appreciate you guys. And man, y'all know how much fun I had talking this program in the offseason. You know, whether it was talking the recruiting trail preview in 2025, I was really damn high on what this program could be in 2025, where this program was going heading into the season. And it's not like I'm not high on where this program can go, but man, did we miss on what this team could be in 2025. And I think a lot of South Carolina fans did. On paper, there was a lot to like about this team. There still is a lot to like about this team. But when you struggle to run the football in this conference, when you struggle to hold up in pass protection, when you have the worst offensive line in this conference, you flat out ain't going to win many football games. And that's what we've seen from South Carolina. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this. Okay, why this makes sense. We kind of got into that in the intro. I just think it's an underperformed unit. And again, the most frustrating part is that you didn't see a lot of development, right? I look at a guy like Josiah Thompson. Last 3 games of 2024 from Josiah Thompson as a true freshman, I looked at him and said, that could be one of the best tackles that we see in the country in 2025. And I don't know if I'm going to get up here and say he's regressed, but hasn't really gotten much better. Hasn't been great to start 2025. And I think you can say that for a lot of different offensive linemen up front. This was a unit that had a nice combination of high school talent that was kind of going into year 2, year 3, but you also had some veterans that you went and grabbed from the transfer portal. You felt like there were enough capable bodies for this to be a solid unit. And it just hasn't been that to start 2025. Now, here's the other question. I think this is where a lot of South Carolina fans want to get into is, should there be more changes taking place? Yes, it is my personal opinion. I look at the offense in general under Mike Shula and say there's very little identity. there's very little that comes easy to this offense. And I normally look at play calling. And look, when you have an offensive line that's played like South Carolina's has, it's hard to run an effective offense. But I also look at Mike Shula and say, very rarely outside of maybe 3 or 4 drives on the year have we looked at South Carolina's offense and said, yep, that was a nice script of plays that allowed South Carolina to move the football easily. It's been relying at some explosive plays at times. Lenore Sellers putting on the Superman cape at times, but there has not been a lot that's come easy. I do put that a lot on Mike Shula as the offensive coordinator. Now, why isn't Mike Shula getting fired like Lonnie Teasley? I think the answer to that is you look at South Carolina's offensive coaching staff and say, who would be the interim play caller? There's not really a name that jumps out to you, right? And that might be part of the problem that Shane Beamer had creating this staff. Is normally when I'm looking at an offensive staff, I like to have multiple different coaches that have significant experience calling plays. So even when Mike Shula is struggling, and he's got a guy that he can lean on and say, hey, am I missing something? Are there some concepts that I can get to? I don't think there's another guy on this staff that really can help Mike Shula right the ship when it comes to play calling. And I think that might have been a mistake that Shane Beamer made when he was building this offensive coaching staff. And so, a long story short, why is Mike Shula not joining Lonnie Teasley in terms of getting fired? Is that I don't know if there's an obvious guy that can take over the play calling duties. Where you look at Lonnie Teasley and say there was a very obvious replacement, interim replacement, you might say, and that's Sean Elliott, who's going to take over this offensive line. I'm very intrigued to see, hey, you get a different voice in the room. What's this unit look like in the back half of the year? Because I think Sean Elliott's a damn good offensive line coach. I don't know if we're going to see significant changes, but I think that's an interesting storyline to make because I don't know if Sean Elliott is the long-term solution to the offensive line position, but I think he very well could be. And that becomes an intriguing storyline to emerge. Who should South Carolina hire? And I want to talk about this from two different angles. Number one, offensive line coach, but I also want to have some offensive coordinator conversations too. Number one, I think it starts with, are we going to get one more year of Lenore Sellers? And I think that's probably where we're trending, right? I'd be surprised if Lenore Sellers enters his name into the NFL draft after this year. Now, you probably got to fight to make sure he's back on this roster in 2026 too. But if you do get Lenore Sellers back in 2026, I think you'll have a really good list of candidates of offensive play callers, offensive coordinators that want to coach Lenore Sellers. I think there's a lot of play callers that look at Lenore Sellers and say, man, I could run a damn good offense with Lenore Sellers as my quarterback one. And so if you do get Lenore Sellers back, this becomes a very intriguing offensive coordinator position in 2026. And maybe that's another critique you could have with Shane Beamer. I'll put my hand up and say I thought Mike Shula made a lot of sense to be offensive coordinator. Kind of that transition. Lenore Sellers seemed to be turning the corner last year. You don't want to change too much. Let's go with Mike Shula. Hindsight 2020, you had Lenore Sellers going into year 3. If you opened up that offensive coordinator search, I wonder what play callers would have been calling and would have been really interested to come to South Carolina and coach Lenore Sellers. Now, here's a name that I think is really intriguing. It's kind of a 2-4, right? Number one, Coach Kotelnicki up there at Penn State. This guy's a freaking wizard, man. I think he is one of the best offensive play callers that you see in the entire country. Now, he came from Kansas to Penn State, and it was a massive hire, and it really worked well year one for Penn State. Penn State made a run to the college football playoff semifinals, a really revamped offense that was dynamic, running the football, but also throwing the football. Now, in year 2 of his tenure at Penn State, obviously things haven't gone all that well, right? And I think Coach Kotelnicki is going to be on the market, obviously, with James Franklin getting fired. Why does he make sense? Number one, I'm not a huge fan of Drew, and I know it hasn't gone very well for Penn State on offense. I don't know if that's Coach K's fault because I go back to Coach K when he was coaching Kansas, with Jalen Daniels at quarterback and say, holy smokes, when Jalen Daniels was healthy and they had those backs, one of the best offenses in the country. And you were saying kind of similar things with Penn State at times last year. Man, if you get Lenore Sellers back for one more year, I mean, Coach K is a guy that wants to selectively run quarterbacks, right? I think this would be a perfect fit. Now, if you go get a guy like Coach K, who's really good at scheming the run game up and then hitting and working some vertical passing, which is the perfect fit for Lenore Sellers, right? Dynamic run game, deep shots down the field. Those are the two things that Lenore Sellers does best at the quarterback spot. So I think Coach K fits that perfectly. Man, what about his offensive line coach, Phil Trotman, who I think is one of the best offensive line coaches that you see in the country. He's another guy that could be on the market with James Franklin losing his job at Penn State. Like those are two guys that I think are two of the better offensive coordinator and offensive line coaches that you see in the country that both could come available after this year that would make a heck of a lot of sense at South Carolina. And here's the thing that I will say is that there's a lot going right, in my opinion, on the defensive side of the football. Given the struggles that we've seen from the South Carolina offense, I think the South Carolina defense has gone to battle, man, has gone to absolute battle. And they have to replace a lot of good football players, right? You love what you're getting from the young linebackers, Fred Johnson, Justin O. They're going to be studs next year for you. I think you like what you're seeing from a development standpoint on the defensive line. I think you got the right guys there. I mean, a lot of them are going to be graduating, but you've seen a lot of guys play their best football. This South Carolina defense should be good next year. I think it should be better than it is this year. It was really good in 2024. We knew it'd take a step back in 2025. Well, I think you can get back to being one of the better defenses in this conference next year. You got to make sure you get this offense right. And if you get this offense right and you get the right play call, you're the right offensive line coach, you get Lenore Sellers back, you can start seeing this thing go back in the right direction, but you got to get these hires right. I would be surprised if Mike Shula's back in 2026. And so I think South Carolina is going to be looking for an offensive coordinator and an offensive line coach in the offseason. I think these two would make a lot of sense. Now, some other names that would make sense. Sam Pittman, you got to at least call, right? I don't know if Sam Pittman will take this job. I don't know if Sam Pittman is going to take a job, period, but you probably have to at least call, right? I think Florida's offensive line coach and Rob Sale has done a really damn good job as well. If Billy Napier gets fired, Rob Sale probably gets a call from Shane Beamer. I look at a guy like Matt Luke at Clemson, and I know it's kind of funky, and I don't think Matt Luke's done a great job at Clemson this year. I think they've underperformed. They've had some injuries, but I know damn well Matt Luke's been a good offensive line coach in this conference. That one would make a lot of sense too. We'll see where South Carolina decides to go. I give Shane Beamer a lot of credit because, look, we know this type of stuff is not the fun part of coaching, right? You build a lot of really good relationships with these coaches. Lonnie Teasley worked his tail off. It just didn't work out. And when you're at this level of football, if you ain't doing your job the right way, you ain't going to have a job, right? And I know Shane Beamer does not like making these decisions. I think it was very clearly the best decision for South Carolina. We'll see where they decide to go. All right, a little Monday morning. There's ways you can be optimistic about where this thing to go, but you got to get these hires right. And we'll talk a lot more about it in the next coming days and weeks and months. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.